When people use a couple of verses out of the letter to Corinthians or the letter to the Romans, we kind of forget it's a letter. A letter has a beginning, a middle, an end. It has a primary focus. And again, people take one or two lines out and then they kind of say, oh, well, this is what it means, but it's divorced from the whole thing. People use Romans as one of the examples, the very, very intro section to Romans. And in doing so, what people do is they completely forget that the whole point of the letter of Romans, if you read it in its context, is that Paul basically says, we're all sinners, and we don't deserve, there's nothing that we can do to actually deserve the grace that God has given to us. All of us. And that there are none of us who are better than anybody else, because no matter how perfect you try to be, you're like infinitesimally better than the worst of all of us, because God's grace is just so much more magnificent than anything that we could possibly ever do. And so this whole idea about tearing up and trying to say, oh, well, this sin is worse than that sin or whatever, the whole letter of Romans actually defies that argument. And yet people take out a particular passage and then try to actually make something of it. The problem, I think, underneath it all, when you boil it all down, is that it's a fundamental threat to somebody to accept that there may be two people of the same gender who may truly be in love and may be able to form a healthy relationship, may be able to have a family, that the threat to allowing that as a present reality is the threat to the understanding of what is the role of the man versus the woman. And if I am part of a society or a group or a culture which, despite feminism, still very much wants to keep women in their place, then all of a sudden, if I start accepting that there may be households where there are two men and the roles need to be kind of negotiated and who's the nurturer and how's this happening, then all of a sudden, if I accept that that's a reality, then that undermines the presumption that roles within a relationship are predefined based on gender. About a year ago, a group of students came in and they worshiped with us, and then after worship, they wanted to interview me. And before we began the interview, one of the college students said, before we start, I have to tell you that for the last half hour, I've really, really been in deep prayer. And he said, here's the problem. He said, you knew that we were coming. And you just welcomed us in, and we worshiped with you, and we were just like, we're always part of who you were. It's just like, it was just, he said, it was just amazing. It was like, we were here, and it was wonderful. And he said, but I know that if you would have told me that you were coming to my congregation, and my congregation knew that you were coming, he said, you wouldn't have been received the same way. And he said, this is causing me a big problem. Because he's like, because for him he was coming into this congregation that he didn't expect to feel the Spirit, and then all of a sudden, it was completely controverting him. And when I hear that, I go back to this whole bit about the ministry of Jesus. Wasn't that exactly the point? That for people to actually see the Spirit of God alive in the tax collectors and the lepers and the prostitutes of the day, if I can see the genuine essence of the Spirit there, don't I see how just profound God's love really is? Isn't that really what it's at? And I think that that's the piece that people miss. Yeah.